What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. It is an absolutely amazing day out today. When the sun was out, it was about 35 degrees, which might seem like cold to you, but for here in Michigan at this time of year, that's pretty awesome. So I'm really happy about that. And I was outside in the garden today, and I wanted to bring you guys along for an interesting video. And I thought, what haven't we really covered? What haven't we talked about? Or what angle have we not touched on? And the thing that came to my mind was garden planning. You know, during this time of year, I always say now is the time that you plan for next year's garden. The time that you don't plan is during the main growing season. You know, I mean, when things are already growing, or in the spring as you're already getting ready to plant, that's not the time to plan for next year's garden. Take the winter months, the cold months when you're inside, you're watching our videos hopefully. Take that time to learn about your garden, take that time to reflect on your garden, and take that time to plan for next year's garden. And so in this video, we're going to talk about garden planning, but we're going to take a little bit of an interesting approach, one that I don't think a lot of people have taken, and one that I have a lot of experience with being a business owner. Now, as you guys know, I went to business school. We talk all about these different business terms and all the terminology that surrounds a business. And I got to thinking, I wonder what would happen if we looked at garden planning like a business. You know, when you're running a business, there's a lot of different things you take into account to plan for next year or next month or next quarter. And a lot of things, there's a lot of overlap that you can relate to gardening. And that's what I thought was really fun, is kind of blending my two passions together and turning them into one and allowing you guys to take a different approach and look at things differently, because it's really going to help you guys out to plan your garden, believe it or not. The first component of running a successful business, as well as a successful garden, should be taking inventory. You should always be taking stock of what you're using and how much you're using, as well as how much you're throwing out from the garden. You see, this really will help hone your actual needs. Because if you're someone that's growing, say, a whole bed of okra, but yet you're throwing out most of the okra you're growing because you're not actually using it in your cooking, your family doesn't like it, your friends don't like it, you're not really finding a use for it, but yet you're throwing it out, it's not actually benefiting you, your family, or your friends. It's not really benefiting anyone, and therefore it's probably best to dial that back. That's called waste. In business, we call that a waste log. And what I like to do is throughout the growing season, I will actually keep a waste log, believe it or not. We'll keep a log, a running tally with the date, how much we threw out and what we threw out, so that when it comes time to planting for next year, we can see if that justifies taking back a few plants. A prime example of this was zucchini. 2 years ago, we grew so much zucchini that we not only gave to friends, family, stocked our fridge, ate fresh, local soup kitchen. We had waste left over, where the soup kitchen literally said, hey, you know, we love bringing in stuff, but legitimately we cannot use this much. And so what we found is that through our waste log, we realized, why did we grow a whole bed of zucchini? So we dialed that back a lot, and we actually grew about half as much zucchini. And this year, while there still was some waste, there'll always be a little bit of waste here and there. You know, it's very difficult to use all of the produce, especially during peak season when, you know, there's a lot going on. As much as I don't like to waste, we did still have a little bit of waste. But we found out that right around 6 plants is ideal for us. That allows us to still grow food for our family, stock our fridge for the off season, as well as give to the local soup kitchen as well. So that's kind of what taking inventory really helps you do. You also want to find out what you don't have enough of. On the flip side, you know, if you have a waste log that's saying, you know, I threw out X amount of zucchini, you should also have a mental log at least of what you're running out of. One of those things I know that we always run out of mid-season is spaghetti sauce. We eat a lot of spaghetti. We eat a lot of Italian food here in our home, and so what we try to find is that pleasant balance of you know, okay, we eat a lot of tomatoes fresh, but we also need to grow some tomatoes, some paste tomatoes, and other Italian kind of plum-style tomatoes to make sauce with. And so if we're running out of spaghetti sauce and pizza sauce and stuff like that in January, and we don't have enough to get us through until July, well, then we should up the quantity of those things to make room for for more inventory of those things. Therefore, we're making a bigger impact on our food bill, and we're also kind of dialing in the efficiency of our garden. The second part about running a successful business and a successful garden is your supply chain management production schedule. Now, that's a lot of stuff to take in, but from a business perspective, during supply chain management, that is from the production all the way to the end user, basically every step along the way. But as it pertains to the first component, which is production, you look at a production schedule. And that is how much is being produced in a given amount of time, as well as how efficient that production model is. Now, again, I don't expect you guys to know these things. I went to school for 4 years to know all of this stuff, so it's a little bit complex, but I'll break it down in a very easy to understand way. If you have 10 machines, and those 10 machines can produce 100 units in a week, right? And your demand is 100 units, you're producing exactly what the demand is. You're meeting the demand with the supply, and that means that you have a perfect equilibrium. Supply should always meet demand. And since your machines are pumping out 100 units a week, you don't need to produce any more than that, because if you produced 101, you would have 1 unit left over that's not being sold. If you had say a breakdown, or say your machine was slower than it normally was, and you only produced 99 units, now there's an imbalance where there's not enough supply to meet the demand, and your supply chain is going to be more inefficient than it would be, because you couldn't sell that unit because you don't have it. And that really applies to gardening in the same way. If we look at potatoes, for instance, let's say the demand for potatoes is 3 bed spaces worth, okay? Or in pounds, let's say each bed we're gonna get 50 pounds of potatoes. And our demand for that year is 150 pounds, okay? You can look at each bed like it's a machine, right? That machine can produce so many units, and each raised bed can produce 50 pounds of potatoes. Now, if you have a bed that does not produce how much you need, you're going to have a shortage. But also, if you don't have enough bed space to meet that demand, you're going to have an inefficiency. Let's say you needed 3 beds to fill that demand. Let's say your family eats a lot of potatoes and you have 150 pounds of demand, but your amount of beds is only 5 raised beds. I don't think it's really advantageous to use 3/5 of your garden to just grow potatoes. And that's where you'd use a term called outsourcing. This is where you actually will rely on somebody else to do the work for you to make your system more efficient. So if I cannot grow 3 beds, if I cannot assign 3 beds to grow potatoes on to meet my demand with the supply of the potatoes, I'm going to then go to the farmer's market, to the grocery store, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm not going to risk jeopardizing my whole system for the sake of one particular thing. And that's really where I love outsourcing, because you can actually go and purchase the rest of the potatoes you need and make your system a little more diversified. So you're not just growing just potatoes, because who grows just potatoes? The third thing that will also kind of tie into the supply and demand and supply chain is, like I talked about, outsourcing. There's another thing that we talk about with outsourcing, and that's not efficient from a cost perspective. Let's say, for instance, that it costs you a whole bed to grow corn. Corn is a great example of this. We outsource corn almost every year to people that have far more land. There's a farm stand just down the road where I can buy a dozen ears of corn for $2. A dozen ears of corn for $2. That is absolutely incredible. Now, that bed space to me is worth more than $2. And I can grow in that bed space, in one raised bed, I can grow about 2 dozen ears of corn. That's $4 worth of corn. What could I put there that is far more efficient and effective for my time besides corn? And that's where I would outsource again, is if the bed space is not actually worth, if you could be growing something more that's going to have a bigger impact on your overall system, that's going to give you a better return on your investment, you'd want to outsource that. The fourth component of business that also applies to the garden is investing. You always want to be reinvesting into the future to keep things growing. Now, if you look at just from a gardening perspective, one of the biggest ways that we can reinvest is in fruit trees. perennials, things that are going to have a future benefit to us that don't necessarily have a current gain. You know, when I plant an apple tree, I'm not expecting to get apples that first year. Maybe not even the second year, but the third, fourth, fifth year, I'm going to be getting continued returns on my investment by putting in that apple tree. That's a worthwhile investment for me because I know it's going to pay off huge dividends later on. Another investment could be, like I said, planting perennials. Now, obviously, apple trees are kind of a perennial, but they could also be perennial herbs, strawberries, like fruit bushes and things like that. Another way that you can invest and reinvest into the garden is by expanding the garden. You might have 2 or 3 raised beds right now. Next year, you might want to invest into 4 or 5 more. You might want to double the size of the garden so you can double your production. That's a worthwhile investment because for each raised bed, you're going to see a return on that investment over time. The first year, you might not make any money back on your garden. So let's say you grew $40 worth of vegetables in that space, but it cost you $60. The next year, you're going to actually be saving $20 worth of vegetables, and then you're going to be recouping that $20 that you still owed on the bed. So once your investment is paid off, it's then giving you a return that you can then say, I'm making a net benefit by reducing my food cost, by growing more food, and making a bigger impact on my family's dinner table. So those are some reinvestment opportunities that you can do in the garden that are very simple. And the fifth and final component of business that you can also apply to the garden is the time value of money. This is something that in business we look at all the time. If I can take $1 now and I can put it in my pocket and I don't do anything with it, if I wait a year from now, that dollar has actually decreased in value. If I were to invest it, if I were to do something with it that would then give me returns on my investment, I would be getting gains on my dollar to where my dollar is actually growing. That's what the time value of money is all about. What I'm really getting at is the time value of money when it comes to actually growing a crop that I'm going to see a return on and how quick I'm going to see a return on that investment. If I'm growing something like artichokes, I'm not going to plant out a full bed of artichokes, even if I really love artichokes, because they take 180 days to mature. I have to wait an entire season. Another crop that takes a long time to mature would be things like celery and parsnips. We're talking 120 to 180 days for all of those crops. That is a whole season where I have to wait for everything to go right in order for me to get a harvest at the end of the year. But my time value of money could be that I'm taking time to plant, let's say lettuce, spinach, arugula, radishes, mustard greens, anything like that that is a really quick turnaround crop. My time value is so much greater to plant those because even with things like beets, where I'm going to get 3 harvests in the year, that's 3 times more productive, 3 times more return on my investment. And so therefore, it's 3 times a better investment. And that's really how I like to look at the time value of money. It's how long does it take to, how long does it take to see a return on my investment? When I put money into my bed, I want to see that return back. I want to see the food on my plate much faster. I don't want to wait 180 days to see my investment come to fruition. I want to plant lettuce. I want to plant spinach. I want to see my investment come back in 20, 30, 40 days rather than in 180 days. And that's really how you want to look at a garden as well, is plant less stuff that is going to take way more time because you're going to see a far bigger return and your time value is going to be way more of a benefit to plant things that are quick return crops. So those are some of the 5 business terms that also apply to your garden. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And I really hope that this was kind of an interesting kind of perspective to growing a garden, planting a garden, because I think a lot of people, they overlook just how these terms really do affect our day-to-day life. And we, anytime we go to the store, we interact with these terms, but they can actually be applied right to your garden as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And as always, we'll catch you all on the next episode. Grow big or go home. Bye.